Ildiko had everything: her own thriving business and a loving family, always ready to help and support her, living with her in a spacious, modern home in California. She worked hard to achieve all of this. From a very young age, she toiled relentlessly, constantly learning and improving herself. But everything changed in an instant when she was caught off guard, leaving her with only a few seconds of life. Ildiko Krajnyak was born on June 8, 1969, in Miskolci, Hungary, the country's fourth largest city, located less than 200 kilometers from Budapest. Ildiko's mother worked in the beauty industry, and her daughter followed in her footsteps, obtaining an education as a cosmetologist. She wasn't even 20 years old, but she was confidently moving toward success. She knew all the intricacies of the business and understood that she needed to continuously learn new things to stay in demand. Clients greatly appreciated Ildiko as a cosmetologist, and she was confident she would never be out of work. That's why, in 1992, the 23-year-old took a big risk and, with just one suitcase and $50 in her pocket, flew to the U.S., landing in sunny California. It was difficult to leave behind her loved ones, friends, and hometown and move to a different country with different people, a different language, and culture. However, she didn't have time to dwell on melancholy. She needed to find a job and get licensed to work as a cosmetologist in California. It didn't take long before Ildiko became the top cosmetologist at the luxury Marriott Hotel Spa. She knew she could rely only on herself and worked hard to ensure her clients would return. A huge role in her success was played by her social circle, but for the friendly, charismatic, and welcoming Ildiko, making connections was not difficult. These and many other qualities attracted her future husband, Ilo Crag, who was a couple of years older than her. They married in 1996, and in 1998, the couple welcomed their son, Keanu. Both parents adored each other and their son, and they were willing to do anything for him. Professionally, Ildiko continued to thrive, and in 2002, she opened her own salon, which she named simply Hungarian Cosmetics. Years went by, her son went to college, and Ildiko's mother also moved to the U.S. Unfortunately, her mother developed dementia, but Ilo took full responsibility for caring for his mother-in-law when Ildiko had to work or needed rest. Specifically, when Ildiko traveled to Hungary on May 5, 2018, to bring new cutting-edge equipment for her spa salon back to California. She returned a week later, eagerly anticipating the chance to try out the new equipment and return to her beloved work. But her plans were not meant to come true. On May 15, 2018, just after 1 p.m., a flood of calls overwhelmed emergency services, reporting a possible fire or explosion in the building where Ildiko's salon was located. Emergency responders arrived very quickly, but the building was already seriously engulfed in flames. Firefighters rushed to evacuate people not only from the burning building, but also from neighboring ones, including a daycare across the street. More than 100 children were led to safety. Many people had already run out of nearby buildings, filming videos and taking photos even before the emergency services arrived. However, no one knew exactly what had happened. Everyone had heard the explosion, after which debris from the building scattered across the area, and thick smoke filled the air. Some thought they had heard fireworks. Others suspected a pipe burst, a gas leak, or even an earthquake. But the force of the explosion shook the neighborhood. The part of the building where Ildiko worked was completely obliterated. Shards of glass littered the ground, car alarms blared, and smoke poured out. Firefighters, police, ambulances, and even the bomb squad arrived, as no one knew what else to expect. Of course, journalists also rushed to the scene. The once quiet neighborhood was now consumed by chaos. People were terrified, unable to determine the cause of the incident. What if there was another explosion? As journalists reported on the incident but still didn't know what had caused the fire, friends and family desperately tried to contact those who had been working or had planned to visit the building that day. Naturally, everyone was messaging and calling Ildiko, but she wasn't responding. Overcome with uncertainty, Ildiko's husband, Ilo, rushed to her salon to find out if she had been at work. However, the officers on the scene still couldn't provide him with any information. Meanwhile, it was becoming clear that there were casualties. One person had inhaled smoke, and two other women, a mother and daughter, had managed to escape through a large hole in the brick wall, despite suffering severe burns. Both women were covered in blood and ash. Shards of glass were stuck to their hair and bodies, and their skin was peeling off in patches. They were rushed to the hospital, where they received medical treatment and underwent surgery. No one knew if there were more people inside the building or what injuries they might have sustained. But when emergency personnel got closer, it became clear that at least one person had not survived. They found body parts scattered in different directions, some even landing in the parking lot. Identifying the victim at that point was impossible. Investigators determined that there had been an explosion, with the epicenter located at the reception desk of Ildiko Spa. Despite the massive damage, the police and FBI quickly ruled out any ongoing threat to the public. However, swift action was necessary because a dangerous bomber, ready to kill, was still at large. The mother and daughter, whose names have not been disclosed, were in Ildiko's salon during the incident and later shared what they witnessed. Ildiko had just returned from Hungary. Although she had assistants, the salon had been closed during her absence. At that moment, there was no one else in the salon besides the two women. Both were regular clients. After their cosmetic treatments, the mother went to the front desk to pay, while her daughter went to get a drink. The older woman recalled how Ildiko picked up a cardboard box that had been lying near other boxes and mail. The box was rectangular, like a shoebox, but not very wide. Ildiko placed the box on the desk and began to open it. The next thing the woman remembered was a bright, searing flash of light when Ildiko opened the package, followed by a loud noise and a wave of heat. She was thrown to the floor with force. There was the sound of shattering glass. The salon plunged into darkness, and the air was filled with smoke and dust. The daughter had to literally dig her mother out from under the debris to lead her to safety through the hole in the wall. Unfortunately, due to a shard of glass, the older woman lost one of her eyes. However, they were grateful to have survived and made it outside. They didn't see Ildiko again. The police determined that the package had not been delivered through the mail, as it would have been traceable. However, they still didn't know who had created the device or what chemicals and detonators had been used. The next step was to collect all the evidence that could be relevant and send it to the Quantico lab in Virginia for analysis. Unfortunately, the police soon confirmed that the only person killed in the explosion was Ildiko. Investigators quickly moved to speak with her family and friends, and they uncovered something unexpected. Despite the fact that Ildiko and Ranilo seemed to care deeply for each other, with Ranilo supporting his wife in every way and taking care of her sick mother, the couple had not actually been together for a long time. They were still legally married, but Ildiko had been seeing other men for years, which Ranilo was aware of. Ildiko didn't like to talk much about how she and her husband had reached this arrangement, but she often shared stories about her romantic affairs. Her friends knew that over the last several years, she had dated at least 5 or 6 men. This was important for the investigation because one of these individuals could potentially be the bomber. In fact, Ildiko had recently started seeing a new man who lived in Sacramento. Investigators began to wonder, could it be that Ranilo hadn't actually accepted the situation in their family and was jealous of her lovers? As a result, they conducted a search of his home. Officers examined every detail of the house, seized all the gadgets, and took away several bags of items to be studied in the lab. However, none of the evidence or Ranilo's behavior suggested that he was a vengeful husband. He was genuinely devastated by the fact that the mother of his son, whom he had once loved and still respected and valued, had been killed in such a cruel way. The saddest part of all this was that Ildiko's son, who was studying in Washington, and her brother, who lived in Hungary, learned about what had happened not from their family, but from the news. This occurred because FBI agents had seized all the devices in the family's home during the search. Unable to reach his father or grandmother, nor the sheriff's office, Ildiko's son began calling local hospitals. When FBI agents finally told him that his mother had died, he was in shock. He couldn't believe it. Meanwhile, journalists were sensationalizing the details of the extensive search in the family's home. It was just awful and inhumane to treat the closest relatives of the deceased woman in this way, not allowing them to find out about her death from their loved ones. Now investigators had to establish who Ildiko had been in contact with and track her movements in the days leading up to her death. Essentially, they were searching for anyone who might have wanted to harm her. They reviewed surveillance footage from the airport where Ildiko's flight landed after she returned from Hungary. Could it be that she hadn't traveled alone? Indeed, she was seen talking to a man who likely wasn't traveling with her since he didn't have any luggage. Furthermore, Ildiko had a layover at the San Francisco airport, and in that footage, she was seen with another man. Now, investigators had images of 2 men, but they didn't know their names. They spoke with Ildiko's friends and also investigated her employees and colleagues, given that the explosion had occurred in her salon. During the inquiry, someone unexpectedly mentioned that the co-owner of her spa, 59-year-old Stephen Beal, was a rocket enthusiast. He had been building and launching rockets in the desert for years, a hobby known to all his acquaintances. This caught the investigators' attention. However, Stephen was cooperative, open, and eager to assist with the investigation. He even allowed officers to search his home and garage. Indeed, they found completed rockets and chemical substances used for making them. Of course, detectives were particularly interested in the rockets Stephen had built and his overall knowledge of explosives. He explained that while he loved rockets, he had never made bombs, as that would require more advanced knowledge and different materials than what he had at home. He mentioned that he had once been into fireworks, but stopped after the September 11th attacks. Investigators were also curious about how he became involved in the spa business without being a cosmetologist. Stephen shared that he and Ildiko had met and become friends in 2016. Before meeting her, Stephen had been a widower for several years. His wife, with whom he had been married for 29 years, died of pancreatitis in 2008. So there was nothing stopping their friendship from evolving into a romantic relationship. According to Stephen, he and Ildiko dated for about a year, and he was happy to help his girlfriend open a spa. Before breaking up, they had taken a trip to Portugal, where Stephen noticed changes in her behavior. She changed the passwords on her phone and was actively texting someone. When Stephen asked her to explain, Ildiko told him that she wanted to date other men. Stephen wasn't happy to hear this, but he understood her decision. He too had begun dating another woman named Valerie. Despite this, Stephen and Ildiko remained not only business partners, but also friends. Meanwhile, investigators continued to examine the victim's life and discovered that Ildiko had been seeing not only Stephen and the man from Sacramento. A witness who visited the spa on the morning of the explosion saw a tall, gray-haired man leaving Ildiko's office. The police identified him as Scott Mullally. He was supposed to have lunch with Ildiko on the day of the explosion and had also picked her up at the airport in Los Angeles after her flight from San Francisco. The man reported that they had spent the night together, but he didn't know Ildiko very well. They had only met a couple of weeks prior at a casino. He didn't seem to have a motive for the murder, but he was still questioned, and a search warrant was obtained for his property. Additionally, the police located another man from the San Francisco airport named Laszlo Robo. He had traveled to Hungary with her, and before that trip, they had been seeing each other occasionally. He lived in Sacramento and was able to prove that he wasn't even close to the spa on the day of the explosion. Thus, the police eliminated the men Ildiko had been involved with, one after another. These leads, however, did not lead anywhere. At the FBI laboratory in Quantico, specialists examined over 300 pieces and fragments of items found at the explosion site. They discovered the outer casing of a 9-volt battery. Only this outer shell remained. The inner part had been completely destroyed. This meant that inside the cardboard box Ildiko had opened was a mechanism that had activated upon opening the box, powered by this very battery. It was clear that a person with no interest in such mechanisms would not be able to create something like this. While the components of the device could be purchased at any hardware or construction store, one would need to know how to connect all these parts into a single lethal mechanism that would activate precisely when needed by the bomber. Ranillo, Stephen, and other friends of Ildiko claimed there was only one person who hated the woman so intensely. This person was not a man, but there was a man involved. In 2015, Ildiko had an affair with a man named Gabor Pol. Gabor's wife, Elizabeth, suspected something was amiss and followed her husband. She caught the lovers in the act at Ildiko's salon. Naturally, it resulted in an unpleasant scene, and Gabor promised to end the affair. However, when tensions seemed to have settled, Ildiko reconnected with Gabor in 2017. Elizabeth decided to take more active measures. She contacted both Ildiko and Ranillo, sending Ildiko explicit photos of herself with Gabor and demanding that Ranillo keep a closer watch on his wife. Of course, she was unaware of the agreement between Ranillo and Ildiko. Clearly, Ildiko was not backing down, and in April 2018, just a month before the explosion, Elizabeth once again reached out to Ranillo, asking him to influence his wife. Ranillo simply suggested that Elizabeth block her rival. Ildiko was determined to continue her affair, and as inhumane as it sounded, the explosion worked in Elizabeth's favor. However, when Elizabeth and Gabor were brought in for questioning, the woman confessed to investigators that she hated her rival, but the couple allowed the police to search their home and examine their phones. This turned out to be a promising but ultimately false lead. While Elizabeth had a motive, she lacked the means or knowledge to create a bomb. No matter how you look at it, the police had only one person in mind who possessed the knowledge necessary to create an explosive device: Stephen Beale. The detectives then examined his past. They wanted to understand whether he had a motive or if he could be definitively ruled out from the list of suspects. Stephen had previously worked as a consultant on administrative matters, but had long been receiving disability benefits due to lead poisoning, which resulted in the development of aphasia. This condition causes a person to lose the ability to speak or comprehend speech, and in some cases to count, read, or write. Nevertheless, Stephen had tried his hand at acting and successfully performed in several productions. That is, he couldn't work, but could act. Moreover, when Stephen met Ildiko several years ago, he had already been a widower for 8 years. His wife, Christine, had died of pancreatitis, right? Not quite. In February 2008, the couple was moving furniture, and while lowering a heavy table down the stairs, Christine fell. Not only was she crushed by the weight of the table at the bottom of the stairs, but Stephen also fell on top of her. The woman was taken to the hospital with injuries to her hip and pelvis. For the next few weeks, she was alternately discharged from the hospital and then returned due to complications. When she died, Stephen was devastated, but this did not prevent him from refusing to help the doctors, for example, by sharing information about his wife's medical history. Moreover, he did not immediately inform the police that he had been home when his wife fell. Christine herself told everyone that it was an accident. However, an inexplicably high concentration of lead was found in her body, and the pathologist could not make a definitive conclusion about the cause of her death. Stephen later claimed that the previous owner of their house made fishing lures and used lead. Allegedly, Stephen himself was also exposed to lead, resulting in the development of aphasia. But the police discovered that 6 months before his wife's death, Stephen bought lead tetroxide, and 6 weeks before Christine's death, he insured his wife. Due to this, the insurance company refused to pay him the insurance. However, Stephen sued and in 2010 received $550,000. While the investigators were looking into Stephen's past, they were also checking local stores where everything necessary for the explosive device could be purchased. They knew which chain of stores, CVS, sold 9-volt batteries. They discovered that Stephen had withdrawn cash a week before the explosion from an ATM near one of the stores in this chain. When they reviewed the surveillance cameras, they saw Stephen enter the store on May 8th and buy just such a battery. He paid in cash. Then he went into the neighboring store and bought a cardboard box, the same size as the box in which the bomb was found. It couldn't have been a coincidence. Finally, although the surveillance cameras at Ildiko Spa were not working, the officers reviewed the footage from the cameras near the spa and saw that on May 11th, a car resembling Stephen's Prius had stopped in the parking lot a block away from the spa. However, for the prosecution and the court, this was not enough. Therefore, the detectives turned to the woman Stephen had been dating after Ildiko, Valerie. Stephen had proposed to her, and now she was his fiancée. Of course, Valerie initially didn't want to think that her fiancé was a murderer. But if Stephen were to confess to someone about the crime, it would only be to her. So the detectives showed her all the evidence against Stephen and pressed her on her feelings, repeating that Ildiko's family needed to know why she had died. To some extent, Valerie herself needed to know if her fiancé could be a murderer. In the end, she agreed. She and Stephen went to Malibu for the weekend. The FBI agents agreed to pay for their stay in Malibu in exchange for planting several microphones on Valerie and in the car. But their plan didn't pay off. Valerie tried several times to bring up Ildiko and her terrible murder, but Stephen didn't say anything suspicious. Ultimately, this only convinced Valerie that her fiancé had nothing to do with the crime. The police did not hope to find any additional evidence and decided to take a risk. On March 3, 2019, a month before the first anniversary of the explosion, Stephen was arrested. He was charged with the destruction of a building resulting in death. In other words, he was accused of manufacturing the explosive device that destroyed the building and killed Ildiko. This was a federal charge. He faced the death penalty or life imprisonment. The possibility of parole was not considered in a federal case. In addition to the main charge of murdering Ildiko, other charges were added, particularly insurance fraud. The man should have reported receiving $350,000 in insurance when he filed for bankruptcy, but he did not do so. His house and car were searched again, and traces of chemicals similar to those found at the crime scene were discovered in the Prius. This was logical, as Stephen would have transported the bomb in his car. In June 2020, the prosecutor announced that they would not seek the death penalty for Stephen. The trial began in June 2022. However, on August 22nd, the jury could not reach a unanimous decision. 9 jurors found the defendant guilty, but 3 were not convinced that it was indeed Stephen Bill who killed Ildiko. The prosecution did not back down. A second trial began on June 29, 2023. Lacking additional evidence, the prosecutors emphasized the brutality of the explosion and Ildiko's murder. They showed the jury a reconstruction video and used a mannequin to visually demonstrate how horrific the explosion was. When the device went off, the mannequin was blown to pieces. The jury was impressed. On July 19, Stephen was found guilty. He filed an appeal, continuing to insist on his innocence. Prosecutors believe everything began with a trip to Portugal in March 2018, just 2 months before the explosion. That is, Ildiko and Stephen were not seeing each other long ago, as the man claimed, but shortly before her murder. He knew she was married but thought that apart from that, she wasn't dating anyone else. In Portugal, Stephen unexpectedly discovered that his girlfriend was corresponding with someone in Hungarian. In fact, she had been in touch with Laszlo, the man who had been with her at the San Francisco airport. Stephen took a screenshot of their correspondence to translate it later. That's how he found out that Ildiko was unfaithful to him. The offended boyfriend pretended to understand and accept Ildiko's position. He also started dating another woman, pretending that it was a long time ago and that it was just old news. But it was merely a public facade. Although he and Ildiko continued seeing each other behind Valerie's back, Stephen felt humiliated, insulted, and wanted Ildiko to pay for this. And when she went to Hungary for business, he calmly crafted an explosive device and brought it to the spa, not caring about how many more innocent victims could suffer in the explosion. He believed he had outsmarted everyone. The crime would have gone unpunished if he hadn't chosen a method of murder that pointed directly to him from the very beginning of the investigation.